The sun was setting, painting the quiet neighborhood in shades of orange and gold. Keanu Reeves, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, was out for a peaceful evening walk. The streets were nearly empty, the air calm, when he noticed elderly woman walking toward him. She looked tired, her face marked with deep lines of age and struggle. Her steps were slow, and she clutched a small bag tightly against her chest. The woman stopped a few feet away, hesitating before speaking. Her voice was soft, almost unsure. "Excuse me, sir," she said nervously, holding out a piece of paper. "Can you help me? I think I've lost my way. Could you guide me to this address?" Keanu smiled warmly, his voice gentle. "Of course. It's not far. Let me walk you there." As they began walking, Keanu couldn't help but notice her worn shawl and the frayed edges of her shoes. Her small bag looked light but precious, as if it carried everything she had. Something about her seemed different, unusual. They exchanged a few polite words at first, where she was from, how long she'd been in the area. But curiosity got the better of him. He looked at her kindly and asked, "If you don't mind me asking, what brings you out here so late? I don't see many people your age out alone like this." The woman hesitated, her steps slowing. She let out a soft sigh before replying, "It's a long story, son. Life hasn't been easy for me, but I don't have the luxury of staying home. Work doesn't wait, even for someone as old as me." Keanu didn't press further, but her words stayed with him. There was a heaviness in her voice, the kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. As they walked side by side, the elderly woman grew a little more comfortable with the stranger beside her. His kindness, the way he didn't rush or seem annoyed, made her feel at ease. She glanced at him occasionally, noticing his warm smile and the gentle way he carried himself. Keanu, on the other hand, couldn't shake the curiosity growing in his heart. There was something about her that felt heavier than the physical tiredness she showed. After a moment of silence, she broke it, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't usually ask strangers for help. But today, I didn't have a choice." Keanu looked at her, his tone soft. "You don't have to explain, ma'am. I'm happy to help." She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It's not just about today, son. Life hasn't been easy for me, not for a long time." Keanu remained quiet, letting her speak at her own pace. She continued, her voice carrying the weight of years of pain. "I live alone. Just a small cottage at the edge of town. It's nothing special, leaky roof, creaking floors, but it's all I have." Keanu nodded, encouraging her to go on. "My husband passed away years ago," she said, her voice dropping. "He was a kind man. Worked hard all his life, just like me. But sickness, it takes everything. His strength, his laughter, and eventually, even him." Her steps slowed, and she paused for a moment, staring at the ground as if reliving the memories. "After he left, it was just me and the children. For a while, at least. But they grew up, found their own lives, their own families. At first, they called, visited on holidays. But over time, those calls became less frequent. The visits stopped altogether." Her voice cracked slightly as she added, "Maybe I became too much of a burden. They have their own lives to worry about. I can't blame them." Keanu's heart tightened at her words. He glanced at her, noticing the way her shoulders seemed to sag under the invisible weight of loneliness. That's a lot for anyone to bear," he said, his voice filled with genuine sympathy. I can't imagine how hard it must be. She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. You get used to it, she replied. When there's no one to help, you learn to survive. But some days, it's just so lonely. There was silence for a moment as her words hung in the air. Keanu didn't know what to say. For someone who had seen and experienced so much in his life, this woman's story touched a part of his heart he hadn't felt in a long time. She continued, her voice steady but low. I work as a house cleaner for some of the families in the area. Not much, just enough to keep the lights on and buy a little food. They're kind enough to let me do it, but it's hard work for someone my age. She chuckled bitterly. You wouldn't think it, but sweeping and scrubbing floors can feel like climbing a mountain when your knees are as old as mine. Keanu's brows furrowed as he listened. You're still working at your age? The woman nodded. What choice do I have? The bills don't pay themselves, and I don't want to be a burden on anyone. I'd rather earn what little I can and keep my pride, even if it means coming home too tired to eat some nights. Her words were simple, but the pain in them was unmistakable. Keanu's respect for her grew with every step they took. She wasn't just surviving, she was fighting against the tide, refusing to let life defeat her completely. She glanced at him, a soft smile tugging at her lips. I'm sorry, son. You didn't ask to hear all this. Sometimes, it just spills out. I guess, it's been a while since anyone else really listened. Keanu shook his head. No, don't apologize. I'm glad you told me. You've been through so much, and yet here you are, still standing. That's more strength than most people have. Her cheeks flushed slightly at his words, but her smile grew a little wider. Strength, she repeated softly. Maybe. Or maybe it's just stubbornness. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn that giving up isn't an option. You keep going, even when it feels like you can't. As they neared her home, the conversation slowed, replaced by a comfortable silence. Keanu took in the sight of her cottage as they approached. It was small and weathered, with peeling paint and a garden that looked like it hadn't been tended in years. A single light flickered dimly in the window, casting a warm but lonely glow. This is it, she said, her voice tinged with both pride and resignation. Not much to look at, but it's home. Keanu stopped at the gate, his gaze lingering on the cottage. He wanted to say something, anything, but words felt inadequate. Instead, he turned to her and said, "Thank you for sharing your story with me. I hope you know how much strength it takes to do what you're doing." She looked at him, her eyes shimmering with a mix of emotions. "Thank you for listening," she replied. "It means more than you know." As she stepped inside, Keanu stood there for a moment, watching the door close behind her. Her words echoed in his mind, and a quiet determination began to form in his heart. This wasn't the last time he would see her. He couldn't just walk away, not after hearing her story. Keanu turned and walked back the way he came, his mind already racing with ideas. That woman had faced so much, yet she carried herself with dignity and strength. She deserved better. And maybe, just maybe, he could do something to help. The evening air was crisp as Keanu and the elderly woman finally reached her cottage. It stood quietly at the end of a narrow, unpaved path. The small house looked tired, as though it carried the same weight of years as its owner. The paint was peeling in large patches, the roof sagged in places, and the single window glowed faintly with a dim light from inside. The garden around it was overgrown, a tangle of weeds and wildflowers that had long been left to grow as they pleased. Keanu stopped at the gate, taking it all in. His heart sank at the sight. The cottage wasn't just small, it was a picture of poverty and neglect, a place that barely seemed to stand against the passage of time. The woman paused beside him, her face a mixture of pride and quiet resignation. "This is it," she said softly, her voice tinged with both fondness and sorrow. "Not much, I know. But it's home." Keanu turned to her, offering her a kind smile. "It's more than just a house," he said gently. "It's the story of your life, and that makes it special." She looked at him, surprised by his words, and then gave a small, grateful nod. "Thank you," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "Thank you for walking me home. Not many would bother these days." He shook his head, his smile growing warmer. "It's no trouble at all. But, if it's okay with you, I'd like to visit you again tomorrow. There's something I'd like to do." The woman blinked in surprise, not sure what to make of his offer. "Visit tomorrow?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Why would you want to come back?" Keanu's eyes softened. "Let's just say I've got a little plan. Trust me." She stared at him for a long moment, as though searching for any hidden motives, but all she saw was sincerity in his expression, and slowly, she nodded. "All right," she said. "If you really want to." Keanu smiled. "I'll see you tomorrow, then." With that, he waved her good night and walked away, his mind already racing with ideas. This wasn't just about helping her, it was about doing something that might remind her she wasn't alone in the world. The next morning, the woman woke up early, her thoughts lingering on the stranger from the night before. She still couldn't quite understand why he had offered to visit her again. It wasn't something she was used to, someone taking an interest in her life. She tried not to let her hopes rise too high, but deep down, a small flicker of curiosity stayed with her. Around mid-morning, she heard footsteps on the path outside. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. There stood Keanu, just as he'd promised, but this time he wasn't alone. In his arms were bags, several of them overflowing with groceries. He carried a large box tucked under one arm, and a second trip to his car revealed another bag filled with warm clothes. "Good morning." Keanu greeted her with a broad smile. "I hope I'm not too early." The woman stepped back, utterly speechless. What is all this?" she stammered. He carried the bags into her small living room and set them down gently on the worn-out couch. "Just a little something to make things easier for you," he said lightly, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Her eyes scanned the bags, filled with fresh fruits, vegetables, canned goods, and even a loaf of bread that looked like it had come straight from a bakery. Then her gaze moved to the pile of clothes, thick sweaters, scarves, and a new winter coat. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her voice trembled as she spoke. I don't know what to say. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Keanu smiled and reached into his pocket. From it, he pulled a small envelope, which he placed gently into her hands. "Because everyone deserves a little kindness," he said simply. "You've worked hard your whole life. You shouldn't have to carry all of this on your own anymore." Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a generous sum of money, far more than she could have imagined. She stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. I can't take this," she whispered, shaking her head. "It's too much." Keanu placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You can, and you should," he said firmly. This is for you. To fix the roof, to buy yourself something nice, or just to make life a little easier. You've earned it. The woman's tears spilled over, and for a moment, she couldn't find the words to speak. Finally, she managed to say, thank you so much. You don't know what this means to me. Keanu smiled again, his own eyes glistening with emotion. You don't have to thank me, he said softly. This is just my way of saying you're not forgotten. People care about you, even if it doesn't always feel like it. For the first time in what felt like years, the woman felt truly seen. She looked around her tiny home, now filled with gifts that spoke of hope and generosity, and for the first time, the weight of her struggles felt a little lighter. As Keanu prepared to leave, she walked him to the door, her heart full of gratitude. You've done more for me than anyone else has in years, she said. I'll never forget this. Keanu smiled, giving her a small wave as he walked down the path. Take care of yourself, he said. And remember you're stronger than you think. The next few days passed quietly for the elderly woman. Her life felt brighter than it had in years, thanks to the stranger who had shown her such kindness. She sorted through the groceries he brought, carefully storing the food and admiring the warm clothes. Every time she looked at the envelope with the money inside, she felt a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't have to worry about where her next meal would come from or how she'd pay her bills. But what she didn't know was that her story was about to reach far beyond her small cottage. As it turned out, one of her neighbors had seen everything. From the moment Keanu arrived with the bags of groceries to the way he listened patiently to her story, the neighbor couldn't help but capture the scene on their phone. They didn't know who he was at first, just that he was a kind man doing something extraordinary for someone in need. But when they recognized him as the famous Keanu Reeves, they were stunned. Without much thought, the neighbor uploaded the video to social media with the caption, Keanu Reeves helping a struggling elderly woman. A true example of kindness in action. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times, with people around the world commenting on the power of simple, selfless acts. Fans of Keanu were quick to praise his humility, while others were moved to tears by the woman's story. I wish more people were like this, one comment read. This is the kind of world we need to live in, said another. By the next day, the story had made headlines. News outlets picked it up, and the video was played on morning shows and shared by celebrities. The world couldn't get enough of the heartwarming tale of a lonely woman and the superstar who reminded her and everyone else that she mattered. The ripple effect was immediate. Inspired by Keanu's actions, people began reaching out to help. A local organization started a fundraiser, and within days, donations began pouring in. The money raised was enough not only to repair the woman's cottage but to provide her with financial security for years to come. Volunteers from the community showed up to fix the roof, repaint the walls, and clean up the overgrown garden. Some brought furniture, others donated new appliances, and one kind soul even gifted her a beautiful rocking chair for her porch. But it wasn't just material things. Letters and cards arrived from strangers across the globe, filled with words of encouragement and love. People wrote about how her story had touched their hearts, how her strength inspired them, and how Keanu's kindness had restored their faith in humanity. One letter read, "You remind us all that even in the darkest times, there's hope. Thank you for sharing your story, it's changed the way I see the world." The woman, who had spent so many years feeling invisible, now felt like she was at the center of something much bigger. She no longer felt forgotten. The kindness of strangers had become a light in her life, and her once empty home now overflowed with warmth and love. Sitting at her small wooden table, the woman picked up a pen and a piece of paper. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the overwhelming emotions in her heart. She had never written a letter like this before, but she knew it was the only way to express what she felt. "Dear Keanu," she began. "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart. When I first met you, I was just an old woman lost in the streets, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. I didn't expect anything from you, just a little help finding my way home. But what you gave me was so much more than directions. You gave me hope. You reminded me that there are still people in this world who care, who see someone struggling and choose to lend a hand without asking for anything in return. Because of you, my life has changed. My home is no longer falling apart, my pantry is full, and my heart feels lighter than it has in years. But more than that, I feel seen. The kindness you showed me has inspired others to do the same, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm part of something bigger, a world filled with love and compassion. I hope you know how much your actions mean, not just to me but to everyone who has heard this story. You didn't just help me, you reminded the world of what it means to be human. With all my gratitude," she folded the letter carefully, placing it in an envelope. She wasn't sure how to get it to him, but she knew that someday, somehow, it would find its way to the man who had changed her life. In the weeks that followed, the woman's cottage became a symbol of hope. Passers-by would stop to admire the little house that had been given new life. Some would even leave flowers on her porch or wave as she sat in her rocking chair, basking in the sunlight and the warmth of her community. As for Keanu, he kept a quiet profile, as he always did. But when he finally received the woman's letter, he read it with a smile and a tear in his eye. He tucked it away carefully, knowing it was something he would cherish forever. This wasn't just about me, he thought to himself. This was about all of us. Kindness is contagious, and it's something we can all choose to spread. This story reminds us how one small act of kindness can create a ripple effect, touching lives in ways we never imagined. What do you think? Would you go out of your way to help someone in need, like Keanu did? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Together, let us make kindness go viral.